our sneaker aficionado, who I think invested in a bunch of these marketplaces.
Slash Clubhouse influencer.
Yes.
Right.
Slash Elon Texter. Cool. So maybe we should just jump into it. And so the thing I wanted to start with was actually starting with the elephant in the room when we talk about 2020, which is obviously COVID. So last year was like pretty unique and unpredictable on a lot of levels. And I think all of you run businesses that were kind of pretty directly impacted by it, but at least based on the Marketplace 100, it seems as if things are thriving. So I would love to hear kind of how the lockdowns impacted you and how you kind of managed to manage your way through them, I guess. And maybe we can start with Melody, the CEO of StyleSeat, since I know salons were one of the early flashpoints for this whole thing.
You know, it's interesting because I broke my leg in a gnarly ski accident at the very end of 2019. And kicking off 2020, I was like, this is still going to be my year. This is going to be our year. This is going to be a great year. And I kicked off our fundraise at the beginning of the year with a broken leg, driving up and down Sand Hill Road. Like, leg was just, I shouldn't have been out. I had to be in a machine in the car when we were driving. It was just so crazy. And at the very end of our process, I think the week that we were expecting a handful of term sheets, the pandemic hit. And I hadn't raised in 5 years, right? We've been happily sort of profitable at running the business, and a pandemic hit, and it was just crazy, which changed everything. So
we met that week. In our San Francisco office. Yeah, I remember.
I hobbled in, and I was in crutches and in a tremendous amount of pain. It was awful. It was wonderful to see you, Jeff, of course, as always. But you know, that was certainly not what I expected. And so we had planned on doing a big consumer push and really starting to turn on and drive the demand side of our business, because we, previous to this, were 100% organic driven, 100% word of mouth. We'd laid an awesome foundation for a marketplace. We're about to turn it on, and the pandemic hit. And so for us, what that meant was obviously rethinking everything. It doesn't make sense to drive ads to people to go to hair salons when hairstyling is illegal in much of the country. And so we took it as an opportunity to rethink everything. We obviously didn't move forward with any of that, and instead chose to focus more on the supply side of our marketplace and deepening our take rate, and also deepening our ability to grow the revenue of the supply side of our business. We actually put $20 million of revenue into the pockets of our SMBs during 2020. That was revenue that they wouldn't have seen otherwise. And that's something that we're really proud of. And just strengthened the overall quality of our ability to proactively grow their revenue. And while it was a different year, it was a challenging year, it was a horrible year in a lot of ways, we ended up, staying incredibly focused and ultimately being a stronger business by the end of it. And it's really benefited us today. But yeah, that was a crazy set of circumstances.
Yeah, I'm so curious too, Melody, because I think just as a customer, like I was texting with my stylist and trying to, the salon would be closed and then it would reopen, and the restrictions were just changing so constantly. And I was just curious, like, how did you maintain that, communication with your supply side, and how did you continue that trust during this difficult time for everybody?
Well, what we found is that a lot of stylists, everyone was freaking out because they're brand new entrepreneurs for the most part. The entire industry has shifted from everyone was an employee a handful of years ago to now the vast majority, about 90% of hairstylists in the United States are independent contractors. And so they're all new entrepreneurs. And there was a huge panic because it was like from state to state, from county to county, what's the protocol? What does COVID mean? What is PPE? How do I keep my clients safe? I can't stay closed for a meaningful period of time, right? I can't not make any money. I'm feeding my family. And so for us, we took a very serious responsibility to help disseminate information, to share best practices of here's what other businesses are doing in your area across the country, and to just try and be a source of truth as opposed to a source of opinion, to help highlight here's what some people are doing, here's what other people are doing, and here are resources, here's where you can buy PPE, and here's the features that we're launching. So we launched digital appointments, for example. So you could we had stylists that were making more money on digital appointments, $20,000, $30,000 a month, teaching their clients how to cut their own bangs, which is not something any of us had ever anticipated. It's crazy, but think about it. You're at home. You need to get a bang trim. You're not trying to do it yourself. Of course, you'll pay someone, $50 or $100 to show you what's going on. And so, we launched a bunch of digital services, virtual appointments, gift cards, prepayments, lots of interesting features to help our businesses maintain their revenue during this time and maintain their client relationships. And it was, it was really unprecedented, but we're our responsibility is even more important. There's more at stake now. And so every single thing we release needs to put more money into our businesses' pockets.
How, Melody, maybe one quick follow-up. How does the business look today versus how it looked in Q1 of last year? What do you think has has shifted that will never shift back?
Well, we have been in the middle of this started about 2 years ago, but we used to be purely a SaaS business where we were an operating system for our beauty professionals. They would pay us, we'd give them access to tools. We've now fully transitioned to where the vast majority of our revenue now comes from marketplace features. And those features are us proactively growing the revenue of our businesses and taking a cut of that upside. So you can think about dynamic pricing, right? Surge pricing for hair. You can think about new client delivery, where we're putting new clients directly into the chairs of our professionals, filling their cancellations for them, right? Doing things that they couldn't do otherwise, taking little cuts of that upside, but we're driving, 300, 400% more revenue to a professional over a period of a couple of years than they would make otherwise. And we just weren't able to do that before. Those features are things that we tripled down on during the pandemic, because we knew that their appreciation, their need for revenue would not go away. And so let's make that our absolute core expertise.
That's awesome. That's so interesting. I wanted to transition it to Max at Fair, because I have to be honest, I did a little bit of a double take when I saw how fast Fair and the wholesale category grew over the last year. I actually would have thought it would have been tough sledding. So can you tell us what happened to you last year and how kind of COVID impacted Fair?
Yeah, so for just as a quick intro for those that aren't familiar with our business, Fair is a wholesale marketplace where we have independent retailers buying from brands. You can think of this as a trade show replacement, where retailers are buying products to stock in their stores. And actually, 80% of our retailers at the beginning of the pandemic, 80% of our retailers had a brick and mortar presence. And so, yeah, to your point, it was surprising to us that we saw the growth that we did. Honestly, at the beginning of the pandemic, sort of similar to the story that Melody was telling, we just had no idea how things were going to play out. It's crazy to think back a year from now, how scary things were. Both the sort of, I think all of us were dealing with craziness in our personal lives, but then on top of that, we had just gotten to the point where it felt like we kind of made it. We just raised $1 billion round. We had a bunch of money in the bank. The marketplace network effects were working. We were growing really quickly. It finally felt like we could breathe a little bit. And then all of a sudden, the business of our customers became illegal. And those initial moments, I think, were pretty touch and go. And we saw a huge hit to our numbers for the first month. Revenue was down, I think, 60 or 70%. And then gradually over the course of the summer, and then really accelerating into the fall, business started to pick up. And actually, we ended up re-accelerating year over year in Q4, and now we're growing faster than we've grown. In Q1 we were growing faster even without the year-on-year pandemic comps. We were growing faster than we had since we were a very small startup. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. The first is that the business of our retailers recovered much, much faster than we expected, like kind of defying logic in some ways. And we've spent a bunch of time digging in to try to understand what's happening to make sure that it's not some weird mirage or something wrong with our data. But I think there's three reasons why the retailer sales have recovered. The first is that our retailers have adapted really quickly to the new situation that they're in, where a lot of them, were locked down or now at reduced capacity, where they started selling online, they started doing live selling. They were really creative in the way that they figured out how to adapt to a world where they couldn't rely as much on their stores. I think that was actually a really positive change. It was something that needed to happen, but I think a lot of them were kind of slow to pick up on it. Like most of our retailers at the beginning of the pandemic didn't even have a website, and now all of them do, and many of them are doing a lot of really creative things where they're offering same-day delivery in their neighborhoods, and are just figuring out ways to leverage their unique advantages, their communities. They're selling on Facebook. They're using their personalities and their storytelling abilities to do live selling. So it's been really cool to see the way they've adapted. I think the second thing that is driving their recovery is there's been a real rush to support small businesses that I think we've seen across a number of different verticals, but I think retail in particular benefited from it, where like the shop local movement was already a big thing. And I think it benefited hugely from people kind of thinking about what life would be like without these small businesses in their lives, because for a period of time they weren't. And I think there was a lot of fear that people had, like us, that all these businesses would close. And I think it led people to really support small businesses in a way that goes even beyond what the shop local movement had accomplished previously. And then the final thing, and the thing that is actually probably the biggest driver, is that honestly, this has ended up being more of a services recession than a goods recession. Retail in general, and even brick and mortar retail, like you look at Best Buy, you look at Nordstrom, their sales aren't down that much. And actually, with the stimulus now hitting, some of them are even outperforming expectations. And our retailers have certainly been beneficiaries of that as well. So there's a whole category that those are the three drivers of retailer sales recovering. And then the other really big reason why I think we're growing even faster, on top of that baseline recovery, is our main competitor is trade shows, and trade shows have not been happening really at all. Like they've been happening, but in really reduced capacity, and so we've been the beneficiaries of our retailers are doing much better than expected, and in fact have actually fully recovered and are now up even over the 2019 comps, in terms of their sales. And then our competitors are still wiped out, and I don't think they'll ever recover. Honestly, based on all the conversations that we've had with retailers, I think a lot of retailers have learned new habits that aren't really going to return. So one of the things that I've always said is you never want to be benefiting from a pandemic. I don't think anybody wants pandemic to happen, but it's definitely better than the alternative. So it's been a wild year for us, but I think the growth that we've seen over the course of the last 6 months has been surprising, but really encouraging, both what it means for our business and honestly what it means, I think, for us as a society in terms of the way that these small businesses have bounced back.
That's fascinating. And so like one of the most interesting things is just like how the more flexible companies through COVID have been able to kind of thrive, whereas the more rigid ones have not. And obviously being a marketplace is kind of one of the most flexible business models out there. But Steve, I wanted to go to you next and actually hear about how things happened from the Cameo side, and how the world changed for you over the last year.
Sure. So very similar to Melody and Max, when COVID first hit, we had no idea what the hell was going to happen to our business. We were coming off a really crazy growth year in 2019. And I think, Cameo along with Fair, I think we're the two fastest growing marketplaces on the Marketplace 100, the original list, so 2019 growth. So we were entering our 2020 year with a lot of momentum. At the time, there was probably two main reasons on the supply side why talent wouldn't have joined Cameo. And we were starting to have like this zeitgeist moment and the flywheel was really starting to rip. But if I could distill the top two reasons why talent weren't joining Cameo coming into COVID, it was number one, I make too much money. And number two, I have no time. And, on March 11th, 12th, when everything shut down, I think really starting with that Wednesday night where Rudy Gobert on the Utah Jazz tested positive, the NBA shut down, the market crashed. We were in a very scary situation where we saw our sales immediately drop, like when the markets crashed through that first weekend, 50-60%. And as Cameo right now is like certainly not a must have, but it's really like a nice to have, and kind of like a fun gift that you can send people in a world where it looked like we were maybe heading to the next Great Depression. It felt like we might have one of those consumer discretionary products that was not in people's budget. So, pretty immediately, like our executive team shifted into wartime mode and started thinking about, all types of different scenarios. We had a really late Sunday meeting that I did with my board, and we talked about every cost that we could slash in the business. Co-founders all took our salaries to zero. We got rid of benefits like our commuter stipend or our gym pass, things that we just knew over COVID we couldn't use. And we're in a very desperate attempt to make sure that we weren't going to have to lay anybody off. But again, when you're down 50-60%,
Wow.
really have no idea what's going to happen. And then something really crazy happened. Like as quickly as we kind of jumped in the shell and felt like we were, needing to hang on for dear life, like the business just rebounded, and really quickly what we saw was tailwinds on both the supply and demand side of our market. So on the supply side, the talent that were suddenly that had previously been worried about, not that they made too much money or they didn't have time, they found themselves like on their couch, just like you and I, and they missed their fans and they wanted to find a way to connect. And, we had this rush in, late March, April, May of so many talent that had told us no repeatedly over the years that were suddenly like answering that DM that they'd, left on read for 2 years, or, getting in touch with the person that had emailed them, or telling that friend that had referred them to come on that they were ready to join the platform. And we just saw a massive rush of so many like classic people that we'd been chasing for years. People like Mike Tyson or Mandy Moore, that in many ways are Chuck Norris, people that are Cameo gold, and finally we're coming through. Separately, one thing that was really interesting, if we had had this Clubhouse discussion a year ago, I know the app wasn't alive yet, but none of us would know who Carol Baskin was. And we started seeing these like cultural moments that everyone was sharing. Tiger King came out and every single person in the country saw it within like 2 or 3 days of each other. And, within a day, we were getting these people who, 2 years before, a year before, were working for minimum wage at, zoos in Oklahoma that suddenly could make 50 grand in a week on the platform. And, that started to really snowball and help on the supply side. So, really famously in August, or infamously, I did an article with the New York Times, and I said that at their core, all celebrities are gig economy workers. And in music, musicians call their concert a gig. Stand-up comedians get paid per show. Athletes get paid per game. Every single person in the creative class found themselves unemployed at one time, and that really forced them to turn to direct-to-fan monetization for the first time. When we started the business, going direct to your fans for payment was seen as incredibly taboo. And, now you look at it and the larger creator economy has just caught on fire. it's really clear that in a world where there's an exponential amount of talent on earth, but the underlying business models of sports, of entertainment, of YouTube, of music, those revenues are all growing linearly, all the legacy businesses. So talent are having to go directly to their fans for monetization. So that ended up really picking up steam as a thesis. And then the last thing I think that was really critical was the fact that not only talent were sitting at home, not able to entertain the people like they love, play music for them, compete in basketball or any of the other things that were going on. But on the consumer side, I don't know about you guys, but I didn't see my parents for a year. But Mother's Day happened, Father's Day happened. Kids were graduating from high school and college. People were having babies. People are getting engaged. Life's big moments didn't stop because of COVID, but we couldn't share them in person with the people that we love. And Cameo became a way that on the consumer side, people started, sharing digital love. They were using that to tell people I love you. They were replacing, a bottle of champagne that they might have brought over to their birthday dinner with, with a cameo from, some star from Dawson's Creek that they loved watching, that you knew that person whose birthday was loved watching when they were 14, 15 years old. And we just started seeing this massive spike as we headed into Mother's Day and Father's Day. And then as the economy started to open back up and people got back, we've now seen every segment of our marketplace, really except for live music, get back to work. And the thing that's been really cool is that the talent came on, the high NPS of the product has kept them on, once the world's come back. Growth continued to accelerate through Christmas, and, the marketplace went from 20 million in GMV to 100 in a year. And we ended up growing just as fast, at a much higher base than we did in 2019 when we were kind of at the top of the charts there. So just such a roller coaster year. And then the very last thing that I should mention, and Andrew, this kind of cracks me up that we're having this conversation today, but I remember sitting at that dinner that we did in Salesforce Tower a couple of years ago, and we were talking about, being a startup outside of San Francisco. And, I remember, you had pretty strong beliefs that, being in the Valley, you could always recruit a better team, and that, for at least for you, like that was pretty far away from your thesis of backing a company not in a traditional tech center. And we look at what's happened. I took Cameo fully distributed, and prior to that, we only hired people in Chicago and LA. We've since opened it up. We've gotten rid of our offices. We've hired people in 28 states. I'm living in Miami now, along with, I think, half of
like Stephen, I'm in Austin, by the way.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we're in the twin, tech hubs.
I see your pictures in Austin.
Yeah.
And, it's been such an unlock. We completely rebuilt our executive team this year, hiring people, our COOs in the Bay, our CFOs in New York. And that's, we've opened this up. And I think COVID has totally changed the game, because you never thought you'd be in Austin. I never, sure as hell didn't think at the beginning of the year. But I think that's right. The enduring trends for all of these marketplace businesses.
That's right. Well, and I think there's something about marketplaces in particular, because it's two-sided, where when you have some economic instability, like the supply side, and the demand side, they kind of like react differently, right? Even if the demand side's, doing a little bit less, buying, then the supply side kind of needs that. But what I want to do next actually is I want to just quickly, transition, hand over the mic to Jeff also, and talk a little bit about, marketplaces and network effects. So Jeff, do you want to go for it?
Sure. The definition of a network effect is the business gets more valuable based on the more people who use it. And, one of the things I've loved about marketplaces, digital marketplaces, since I joined eBay in '99, God, 22 years, is that marketplaces, if you win your segment, tend towards network effects, which gives defensibility, which is what companies need. A lot of companies can grow fast, but needing to defend your lead is critical. And marketplaces for me are perfectly suited to develop those network effects that help defend profits, defend growth, defend everything. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, and Jeff, you're kind of the king of the marketplaces. You've got the Airbnb and Instacart, and we have one of your companies here, Neighbor, which is the Airbnb for storage. So, Joseph, I don't know if you have a few seconds. It would be great to hear about the network effects in Neighbor and how that flywheel really works for you.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that it's hard to understand until you see it yourself. Like, I'm sure a lot of people are reading Marketplace 100 and they're looking at Instacart having 70% of the GMV volume, and that just seems ludicrous, but it actually makes a lot of sense, right? It's almost like the number one position on the Marketplace 100 is always going to have 30 or 50 or 70% just because of how the exponential growth works. I've been amazed year over year looking at Neighbor. It's like every year we get done and it's like, oh yeah, that was amazing. We did 5x, net revenue growth year over year. And then the next year comes along and you do it again. And you keep thinking the volume is going to increase and therefore the growth rate is going to decrease, which is what I think happens in a lot of SaaS style businesses, but it doesn't. It just keeps growing because people keep spreading the word. And especially on the supply side, you start, at least for us, you start to get more and more organic sharing there. So as far as Neighbor goes, everyone's been talking about kind of the COVID effects. I think we're probably maybe the one business in this room that never had to have much of a panic attack during COVID. We were looking at it and I remember Jeff was out here in Utah telling us, hey, this pandemic is coming and we didn't really anticipate it, but when it finally became real in March, we just looked back to 2008 when storage was the best performing asset class and kind of knew that everything would continue to grow. And that's what happened. You had a lot of people that were moving out of cities like New York and San Francisco. I mean, you guys were just talking about how you're running distributed workforces. Everyone's moving out of these major cities and moving to more inland cities like Austin, et cetera. And what that does is it drives storage demand. So on the demand side, we saw a huge influx of demand. That was only compounded by the fact that people were just spending more time at home. And when you're at home, you notice your home and you start to do things to it. You start to clean out space. You clean out a room for a home office. And then you need a place to put those items. You clean out a room for a home gym and you need a place to put those items. It got to the point where all we were talking about, Jeff's on our board and he could tell you what our board meetings sounded like for the last year. And it was like, how do we keep up with this demand? How do we get more supply? How do we get more supply? Andrew, I remember, reached out to us right at the height of the pandemic last year, towards the middle of the year. I think, Andrew, you just bought an RV or a Sprinter.
Yes. Van life. Hashtag van life.
Van life. And everyone did, outdoorsy boomed last year. And so Andrew reached out looking for a place to store his van, and we were right at the height of this, and we almost couldn't help him. It was like an embarrassing moment where he was like, I need a space in San Francisco. And we were like, yeah, they're all booked. We need to find more space.
Yeah. Well, he just parked it on the street and it was stolen the next day. So that was fine.
No, Jeff, that's not what happened. I decided to then drive it, to Utah. That was my solution to the problem, to the storage problem.
Hey, Utah, whenever there's a problem, come to Utah. It's a great place to be.
Amazing.
I think I might have actually gotten the last storage unit in all of San Francisco. We had to drive about 45 minutes outside the city to actually get the unit, but I think we got the last one. So it was a huge win for us. So one of the things I want to think about is, we often talk about network effects and like Jeff and Joseph were talking about network effects in Neighbor. But we sometimes just skip over the cold start problem. And I want to make sure we kind of spend enough time talking about that. And I wanted to go to Grant at Whatnot because it's an early one, and I know you guys have some interesting thoughts on how to think about the cold start problem. And I also know Andrew's writing a book on the cold start problem too, so maybe he can weigh in there too.
Sure. Happy to pipe in. And just to remind people who are listening in, I'll give you a little background on Whatnot. We're a live streaming focused collectibles marketplace. So you can kind of think about us as a social eBay, for lack of a kind of better comparison. We started our business in December 2019. So I guess the cold start problem is still pretty vivid in my memory. And in all honesty, we were still working on various hacks all the way through August to continue to kind of get the flywheel moving. When we initially launched the business, we actually started a bit more of a traditional marketplace. If you're to go on Whatnot today, you'll kind of see two core parts of the experience. You'll see a live streaming experience where a seller can turn into either a Sotheby's like auctioneer or a QVC like host. And then you'll see a kind of a traditional marketplace where anyone can sell asynchronously. And we got the business started with the traditional marketplace. And, to get these things going, you have to solve one side of the marketplace. And so we first started on the supply side to try and build an audience of consumers. And the way we approached this problem was we scraped data across the internet and came up with basically a simple pricing algorithm for how much various collectibles were worth. And we let people purchase those items from us and then would go and purchase them once they were sold from other places and then make sure they were authentic and, in the proper condition. And, this was how we solved this, like the initial kind of supply problem, built out a pretty large audience doing this. As you can imagine, it's pretty operationally intensive. So, it definitely took up a lot of our time. And then slowly, as we built up the buy side, we actually, when we initially built the marketplace, we launched it and everything and didn't have a full supply side like opened up and built out in the product. And then we built that out. And we're actually nervous about how, if we opened it up to sellers, whether there'd be a high enough sell through that would retain people. And so we then next approached, how do we bootstrap the supply side? And we kind of, what we did there was, we allowed obviously people to sell and come in and buy from our platform, but we also cross-listed to other marketplaces and would fulfill those orders if they were bought on that marketplace, which, it provided, there was a lot of operational challenges dealing with sellers who don't ship things, et cetera. But what it did do is it provided really incredible sell-through for our sellers, like better than any competing marketplace, because they basically had us they could sell on, plus any of the places we cross-listed to. And then slowly through that, we ended up opening up the live experience, and we had this buyer base, we had the seller base, and that just amplified the flywheel that we started to get turning. So that was how we did it. We thought very carefully initially, like, how do we get our first set of buyers? And then once we have our first set of buyers, how do we provide an experience that's actually going to keep sellers retained, which meant having a sell-through comparable or better than where anyone else could do.
Yeah, Grant, and I think that's such an interesting characteristic of marketplaces, where you end up, you may eventually end up with a much broader network, but in the early days you're kind of trying to have very tactical things to bootstrap it. And so as Darcy had mentioned, that's one of the things that I'm working on in a book, to sort of abstract a lot of this stuff into like a cohesive strategy. And so the book is called The Cold Start Problem, which basically breaks this framework into a couple different stages. Where that first stage in the cold start ends up being a bunch of these like really kind of unique hacks. Like these are things like come for the tool, stay for the network, or just using subsidies and money to like kind of break into the network, et cetera, et cetera. So I do think that I know that we also have Eddy and Goat here, and I know Sriram, since you're such a big fan of the company, maybe you can kick it off.
By the way, Andrew, just so you know, all of you can go pre-order Andrew's book right now, and if we won't mind if you take a minute to go to that. Andrew, do you suggest people going and pre-ordering a book right now?
Thank you, thank you, brother. That's great. Yeah, it's the domain actually. If you go to coldstart.com, I have a landing page set up for it.
Yeah,
So,
feel free to buy multiple copies, buy one for your friends.
That's supposed to be my job, Sriram. You're taking my work here.
I know. Sriram's the hype man. Anyway, Eddie, go for it.
No, we actually have a great cold start story if you want to hear it. So
yes, go for it. Yeah.
I mean,
sure.
Before GOAT was a sneaker and fashion marketplace, like kind of Jeff alluded to, we were a completely different business, and we actually pivoted a few times with the small amount of money we had. I mean, we literally pivoted 3, 4, 5 times. We were like Kobe Bryant down low in the paint, just like, juking our investors left and right. But with the money we had, and I love telling how GOAT was started because Jeff's in the room and I like to make it awkward. But GOAT started because my co-founder, he's been a lifelong sneaker enthusiast, and he actually bought a pair of shoes on eBay, and something he was nostalgic about from his childhood, and they turned out to be fake. And so we were just like, how come we're spending hundreds of dollars on a marketplace online and still have to worry if it's real or fake? And so GOAT was born because of eBay's authentication problems. So I want to thank Jeff for building eBay and helping us start GOAT.
Hey.
But in terms of the cold start problem, I mean, just like what everyone was mentioning, I mean, it's the chicken and egg problem. And, if you have no buyers, there's no sellers that are going to list anything. If you have no sellers, nothing, there's nothing for buyers to buy. So we just had a little bit of money, and what we did was we had to become sellers. We bought, I would say a couple hundred of some sought after SKUs in the sneaker market, and we only had we bought a couple hundred SKUs. And when you look on eBay, what you notice is that people will put their sneakers on their bed or on the floor and take pictures of the sneakers. But given we only had like one of every type of sneaker, but we wanted to showcase that we had a robust marketplace, what our chief brand officer did was he went to Home Depot and bought 1 foot by 1 foot sample tiles, like a wood tile, a laminate tile, a porcelain tile, and he photographed the sneakers on these 1 foot by 1 foot tiles to make it look like, let's say a Jordan 6. It was the same Jordan 6, but photographed on 30 different tiles. So it looked like we had 30 sellers instead of just one seller where we were just photographing the shoes ourselves. So we just kind of hacked it and pretended like we had a robust seller marketplace so that buyers could trust us. And that's kind of how GOAT was born.
So, I mean, Eddie, what was always interesting to me at eBay, we lived in terror of, we were a horizontal marketplace that traded everything. We lived in terror of someone coming in and calving off a vertical and doing it much better. And the one that did happen while I was there was StubHub, where they charged like 4 times more big to sell and buy your ticket, but they did it in a way that was really well tailored to the vertical and got rid of a lot of the angst on fake tickets and things like that. Was that your thinking in GOAT?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, our whole thing was reducing as much friction from the marketplace as possible, right? Because if you're someone who, let's say you're not a sneaker enthusiast, you're just someone who likes fashion, you go on eBay to go buy a pair of sneakers, you type in Yeezy and you might see 100 sellers selling that same exact SKU and size that you want to buy. You have to go through and sift through every seller, look at their photo set, look at the reviews, look at how fast they ship, and then you have to worry if it's real or fake, right? It might take you 3 hours to buy a pair of shoes and you're still worried what you're going to get in terms of the product. As opposed to on GOAT, we wanted to reduce as much friction from the marketplace as possible so that you just go on GOAT, you see the size and the SKU that you like, you see the lowest price, and you click buy. And GOAT deals with all the messy marketplace issues behind the scenes. Because what we did was we pioneered what we call ship to verify, where when a seller sells something on GOAT and a buyer buys something, the seller actually ships it to one of our facilities first for us to authenticate, quality control it, and actually rewrap it in our own GOAT branding and GOAT box before we send it off to the buyer. So the buyer gets that retail-like experience, and we take care of all that messy marketplace stuff so that the buyer just has as little friction as possible when buying from a marketplace like ours.
Awesome. I wanted to switch over to do some rapid fire questions where we can ask a question and get the answers from all the CEOs on this call. The first question I wanted to kick off is, What would be your piece of advice for other founders looking to start a marketplace business? Stephen, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I think it's really important to identify which side of your marketplace is more rare. And in, Cameo's side, it was go after the supply side, lock them down. And, we believe that supply can beget its own demand.
Great answer. Joseph?
Yeah, I just double down on what we were just talking about, this cold start problem. And the only thing I'd add to that is to say, realize that there's multiple cold start phases. So you're going to go through this initial cold start phase where there's this chicken and egg problem. But then you're going to figure out what Stephen said, that there's one side of the market that's dominant. And the cold start, once you have one side completely figured out, the cold start for that other side is going to look a lot different than it did when it was a chicken and egg problem.
Thanks, Joseph. How about you, Melody?
Similar to what they said, I think I naively thought that we'd be able to come in, solve a problem, move on, identify, solve a problem, move on. And the reality is you really, really have to maniacally focus. Like I wanted to do so much, and we had to identify that first incredibly important problem, solve it incredibly well, identify the next most important problem, solve it incredibly well, which means going slowly but really nailing it every time.
And being very clear and breaking it down into smaller chunks.
Exactly.
Great. How about you, Max?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that we struggled with in the early days, and I don't know how common this is, but I'll just lay it out there, was it was hard for us to know whether or not the struggle to get traction for the first, it was like 9 months, was because there just wasn't room for an online marketplace here, and the demand side just wasn't interested in buying goods online for wholesale, and how much of it was we just didn't have the supply. And it turns out we spent a lot of time iterating on value props and trying different ways of getting the demand side to buy, when really the problem was we just didn't have the sufficient supply and we didn't have the right supply. And so I think it's recognizing that building a marketplace takes more patience, and product market fit can be more elusive in a marketplace business. And I think you have to be prepared to try to solve the cold start problem and grind it out.
And when you say patience, what kind of time frame should other founders be prepared for?
It's a great question. I mean, it took us 9 months. I think you talk to some other marketplaces and it takes even longer.
Yeah.
But I think that's the hard thing is other startups, I think you can get signal faster on whether or not you have something, just by building it and seeing if people respond to it positively. Whereas with this, it just takes a lot longer. And that's how you end up doing things like the folks that have talked about here of trying to figure out ways to bootstrap the supply side and get that signal faster. I think that's why it's important, either the supply side or the demand side, whichever you think is more important, to whatever you think your riskiest assumption
Right.
from a product market perspective is.
Harder to pull off, but definitely higher reward for those that take on the risk. Because again, the network effects of marketplaces.
Yeah, once it starts working, it's super fun, but it's a grind. Starting a startup is a grind, and starting a marketplace is an extra grind.
Yep. Eddy, same question for you. What advice do you have for founders looking to start a marketplace business?
I think just solve a problem for a small group of very passionate users. I mean, the sneaker community is no exception to that. And even to this day, a majority of our new users are organic users, because our passionate community just will keep shouting about us from the rooftops whenever they had a great experience. Of course, conversely is true. If they have a negative experience, they also shout from the rooftops. But if you play things right, we've just been so fortunate to have solved this problem for this initially small group of passionate users, and it's just the market's grown from there.
Cue Sriram.
There we go.
Grant, our fastest growing startup on the Marketplace 100. What advice would you have for founders looking to start a marketplace? I know your cold start problem was a much shorter, condensed time frame. So,
but it was hard. It was very hard. Like, we worked really hard to get it going. I mean, I think my advice would be consistent with everyone's here. I'd probably break it down into two things. I think first, figure out what you're going to make that people are going to love and really want. Because if you don't have that, then like all of the other pieces don't matter. So have an idea of something that is going to be really valuable to people. And then if you're doing it as a market, and because if that's a marketplace business of some sort, then get really tactical on how you're going to bootstrap the business to get to scale, to understand whether your hypothesis there is going to work. You know, I'll give this as an anecdote because I think it's interesting. So I quit my job December 5th, 2019. I was working at Facebook. And, you know, for the first like 2 to 3 weeks of the business, we couldn't generate any sales, such that, you know, we had like a come to Jesus with the team. And we're like, okay, if we can't generate any sales for this business, we're just going to have to change it. And we set a deadline of January 31st. And we just pushed as hard as we could until January 31st and pushed on every tactic that we believed would work. And then luckily by around December 28th, 29th, we started to get some traction and things started to move. So anyways, I thought it'd be a funny story because, you know, Whatnot was 4 weeks away from a complete pivot. Because, you know, you face these problems where it's hard to get signal early on. And so, you know, what the reason we set our timeline is we felt like we could roll through the tactics that we needed to roll through to validate our hypothesis in that amount of time. And it turns out we were able to validate it, and validation came back positive. But you know, that's why I say have a really good problem that you're going to solve, and then get down to the tactics for how you're going to get the marketplace off the ground. And you should be really thoughtful with those, because if you can't get it off the ground, none of it matters.
What a story, Grant. We did not know that when you were raising from us. That's awesome. I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, we're pretty ruthless. If we don't see, you know, results, you know, within our hypotheses, then we'll look to adjust our thinking. But
yeah,
luckily it worked out.
So next rapid fire question, and we'll start with you, Grant. The moment you found product market fit and how you knew.
So we went through 2 phases of the business. We went through the phase where we built the asynchronous marketplace, which looks much more similar to, say, an eBay or a Goat. And that business was growing well, you know, 30-40% a month, something like that. But it didn't really feel transformational enough. We didn't feel like we really hit the social side properly. And so we were still pushing because we didn't think we had the thing that was game changing. Then we launched our live video product. And I was the first person to go live in our live video product. And I sold out of $5,000 worth of Funko Pops in 2 hours. And we even then,
awesome.
And so I think at that point we were like 60% sure we had something. And we kept on pushing that and pushing it more and scaling it out. I mean, the big question to us at that point was whether this thing would scale and it would have some sort of repeatable effects. And we kept on scaling out to more and more people. And then, you know, growth continued to go at like crazy rates, such that we were lucky enough to be the fastest growing startup this year on the marketplace list. And then something turned, which was all of a sudden, instead of having to work really, really hard to drive growth in the business, we were working really, really hard to catch up to growth. And so our biggest problems were like hiring customer support to keep up with customer support queries, hiring engineers to keep up with scalability issues. And so to me, the moment I knew was when my time was spent catching up to growth instead of figuring out how to drive it.
Yeah. Steven, how about you? What was it like for Cameo?
Yeah, we've got a pretty funny story of both, like the moment I really felt we had demonstrated product market fit and our launch. We actually launched Cameo on March 15th of 2017. And I was getting pretty nostalgic about it. And I actually saw the tweet that we'd sent out. And back to the last question, right? We fundamentally believed at Cameo that our supply could beget their own demand. So to get going when we had 0 people on the platform or 0 customers. You can imagine pitching a marketplace to talent, telling them that they could connect with their fans and there's no fans. And you could imagine telling fans we're building this marketplace where they can, get a personalized shout out from the people they love the most, but with 0 talent on the platform. So we started with 1 talent, Cassius Marsh. He was a backup defensive end of the Seattle Seahawks at the time. And he recorded this video for my co-founder, Martin, months earlier, congratulating one of Martin's buddies who was a Nike marketing executive on becoming a father for the first time. And Cassius took that video, sent a tweet out, put it to his 50,000 followers on Twitter. I happen to be in Scottsdale, Arizona, trying to get the second person on Cameo. Devin and Martin, my co-founders, were in Venice Beach with Cassius Marsh. We sent this tweet out. We both rushed to Google Analytics to see what would happen. And there were 2 dots on Google Analytics, one in Scottsdale, one in Venice, and not a single other person came to the site. And, we were not sure originally if we'd set up Google Analytics properly. So I remember literally signing off the site and the dot disappeared in Scottsdale. And then it came back when I came on. So really embarrassing. At the same time, Cassius, this defensive end, people started trolling him on Twitter and saying, hey, you're an NFL player making millions of dollars a year. How could you possibly charge people for, to talk to them? You're such a scumbag, essentially. So on both ends, we were getting no, good feedback on the consumer side, which was brutal. And then all of a sudden, I'll never forget it. It felt like 45 minutes. Who knows how long it was? But this dot popped up in Renton, Washington, which is up near Seattle. And all of a sudden, this dot's on the screen, and we think this person might buy. There's literally nothing to do on the site. There's no videos to watch, no other talent. And the dot goes away, and we were so dejected. And then my phone starts vibrating, and this guy goes, hey, my daughter's favorite person in the world is Cassius Marsh, this player. And her birthday is coming up on Thursday, and I want to get my little girl a video, but your payment processor is not working. So at that, I messaged Cash. He had basically run out on us because he's like, screw you guys. You lost my 25 grand. This business is a disaster. My co-founder, Martin, ran after him to try to save his only client. But we ended up getting this video 2 or 3 days later. And when we saw the reaction that this father sent to that video, immediately we knew if we could make one person feel like that, we could make millions of people feel like that. It was just a matter of, could we make this so fun for the talent that they would do it for free, but they're getting paid.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Joseph, rapid fire. How about you?
Yeah, not to get too existential, but I've had a lot of discussions with people about what product market fit is. It seems like everyone's got a different definition. Some people say it's NPS score, and I'm not sure that is. We've had high NPS scores since the beginning, but didn't have product market fit, that's for sure. I've literally had an investor tell me, he's like, product market fit is when in a marketplace is when Jeff Jordan decides to join your board as a marketplace. It's pretty funny.
If that were only true.
But to answer the question, I'm not sure we did even have product market fit when Jeff joined our marketplace. Probably for me, what it was when we had our target markets, what we thought were our target markets, and we constantly checking the growth on that. And then I go to the team and I'm like, what's this market? This is our fastest growing market, and it's not one of our target markets. I didn't know we were in that market. And they're like, we're not. So that's what product market fit looks and feels like to me, is when you have this organic engine that is fueling your business in a place that you don't think you are. That's what product market fit looks like for us.
I agree with that. That was the fascinating observation. You were focused on 3 or 4 markets. Growth was good. And there was this category called other that was on fire. And it's just like, okay, why is other on fire? What is other? And it turned out other is the rest of the country where we weren't focused, which was organic take up.
Exactly.
Okay, one last rapid fire question, and we'll go to Melody, Max, and Eddy for this one. What's the marketplace company you most admire? Maybe we'll start with Melody.
Oh my gosh, that's the hardest question. You started with me.
No pressure, Melody. No pressure.
It's the end of the Clubhouse. We got to up
I
the
had
game
my
now.
really beautiful answer for the last one, and now you surprised me. You know, it's so I love studying marketplaces, obviously, because I spend the majority of my time studying my own, and I'm constantly surprised about the dynamics. I love cruising through Looker like in the middle of the night and just running queries and like being surprised. It's so much fun. So I don't know. I'm gonna give a really dumb answer, which is like I love reading S1s of companies that go public. I love reading about all the different dynamics of the different marketplaces because for as many theories as you can have around this is how marketplaces operate, there's that many opposite examples, right? Or as many sort of theories as you can have around take rate and supply versus demand and one side versus the other and all these things and K factor and all this stuff. Every single marketplace is a snowflake and they're all so different, you know, almost more than they're the same. So it's a total just like horrible answer to your question, but I do find them to be so different and fascinating and unique and surprising.
Awesome.
So I like a lot of them.
Very cool. Okay, Max, how about you?
Sorry, I was struggling with the mute button. I think I agree with Melody that this is a tough one because they are all so different and interesting. But I think probably the food delivery marketplaces, and the one that jumps to mind is DoorDash, just because the way that they have just like relentlessly executed and kind of won the space. No offense to anyone who works at any of the others, but it does seem like they're on their way to winning, at least in the US. And I think the reason is I worked on Caviar when I was at Square, and it's so hard, the three-sided nature of that business and the fact that it's food and it like spoils. And if you don't get it there in time, the customer screams at you. I think it's so unbelievable the way that they have built that business to the scale that they have and have continued to solve problems. And I'm a big admirer. I also think Tony's amazing and really look up to him. So that would probably be my answer.
He is damn impressive. I agree.
Yeah, it is one of the most operationally effective companies I've ever seen run. Eddy, how about you? If you could recreate yourself as the marketplace founder of a different marketplace company, what would it be?
We are big fans and we look up to Josh Silverman and Etsy. I mean, the way they've harnessed their community, built up that community, and even encouraged the community to help out during COVID to create face masks and stuff. And then just their execution, right? Like, I mean, go similar to Etsy, like we don't try to run a marketplace or build a marketplace at all costs and try to grow at all costs. Like Etsy's profitable, and you know, we like to build a long-term profitable business as well. And so it's just like the model that Etsy's built with harnessing the community and their kind of executional prowess is something that we really look up to.
That's amazing, and such a good place to end. Awesome. Well, I know we're at the hour. So this has been fantastic. Thank you so much to Melody, Joseph, Eddy, Stephen, Grant, everybody for joining us tonight. It's been a blast talking with everybody, and I hope everybody has an awesome night. And if anybody wants to read more, the Marketplace 100 is available at u16z.com/marketplace100. So check it out and you can spend more time reading it. And thanks again to everybody for participating tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Bye. This was amazing.
Thanks for coming,
Bye,
everyone.
thank you.